Dr. Richard Jacoby DPM received his postgraduate education at Villanova University in Pennsylvania and attended medical school at Pennsylvania College of Podiatric Medicine, now named Temple University School of Podiatric Medicine in Philadelphia, graduating in 1969. Dr. Jacoby has won the Phoenix Magazine Top Docs Award on 4 different occasions: 2003, 2005, 2008, and 2010. And he is the co-author of the book Sugar Crush: How to Reduce Inflammation, Reverse Nerve Damage, and Reclaim Good Health. Dr. Jacoby is a past president of the Arizona Podiatry Association, as well as the Association of Extremity Nerve Surgeons. He specializes in the treatment of peripheral neuropathy and has been in practice since 1970. Hello everybody, I'm so pleased to have today with me for another episode of the Healer Hub podcast, Dr. Richard Jacoby. I'm so happy to have you on.
Well, thank you for having me. I actually pronounce my name Jacoby. A lot of people pronounce it Jacoby. It's becoming a popular first name out here. We're in Arizona. I'm in Scottsdale, Arizona right now.
Okay. So thank you for that. That's useful information. I should have asked that beforehand. So I'm curious about your background story, who you are, and how did you come to writing 2 books?
Well, it's been a long journey, so it has actually about 50 years. So I originally trained as a podiatric surgeon in Philadelphia, and I had traditional allopathic training in surgery and medicine. And I had the fortune when I moved to Arizona to run into Dr. Lee Dallin from Johns Hopkins about 25 years ago. He trained me in peripheral nerve surgery. And that was a seminal moment in my training because I treated traditional diabetic neuropathy by medical modalities such as Lyrica and gabapentin, drugs such as that. Lyrica was the #1 drug 25 years ago, and that was the standard care, still is, by the way. But with his training and opening my eyes to a different way of looking at this disease state, and I was running the Scottsdale Healthcare's wound care center at the time, and he made this amazing observation to me that you could treat diabetic polyneuropathy, that means many nerves of the lower extremity, to correct that problem. He came to that realization in the 1980s, believe it or not, wrote his first paper in 1984, because a patient said to him, Dr. Dallin, you fixed my carpal tunnel, which is at the wrist, and my ulnar tunnel at the elbow. Why don't you fix my diabetic neuropathy? And he said, well, that's a different disease. And he thought about it since he was at Johns Hopkins, also the National Institute of Health in Baltimore, that he said, well, let me go to the laboratory, look at these different tunnels in the lower extremity. Long story short, he wrote 2 textbooks, 750 articles, not all of which I read, by the way, but I did read a lot of them. And he came up with the concept that diabetic neuropathy is really a compression neuropathy. Now, for your audience, that may be new information. It may not be relevant information as to your average patient or average listener, because most people don't really experience diabetic neuropathy until later in life. So if you're 30 years old or 40 or 50, you're probably not going to understand what is happening to your body. But let's go back into the biochemistry of this whole process, and I'll kind of try to put these pieces of the puzzle together. And so after doing thousands of those decompression surgeries, and I really didn't have any amputations. And by the way, there's 1.5 million amputations for diabetic neuropathy in the world every year. So I started to really think about this in terms of why it took so long to get to that point where gangrene set in. And then when you look at the biochemistry, which I did. And when I was studying with Dr. Dellon, I said to him, I think there's more to your theory. And he's a pretty much pure surgeon. And I said, I think there's a chemical basis for all this. So he said, why don't you figure it out? So that started my quest about 25 years ago. I found a doctor who wrote an article, and your public can read it. It's in Circulation Journal, 2004. It was called the Uber Marker for Circulation for the Heart. I read it. It was by Dr. John Cook at Stanford. I texted him. I said, I think you have the missing link. He called me on the phone really 2 hours later after I texted him. So he invited me up to Stanford. I worked with him. I think we figured out that missing link about 25 years ago. But it takes a lot of research. I was in clinical practice, so I said, I'll write a book, outline what I think is the problem, and real scientists like Dr. Cook will figure it out. Well, they did. It is now true. Asymmetric dimethylarginine is the original molecule that changes the chemistry of the nerve in the very, very early phases. So let me speak to your audience now. So migraine headaches, is that part of it? Absolutely. Irritable bowel. Yes, all these, what we call somatic illnesses that are not really manifesting as serious illness, like a migraine headache, although at the time it's very serious, that's really compression neuropathy secondary to the chemistry of sugar. That's simply put. And I weaved all that together to look at autism, Alzheimer's, MS, and all the other neurologic diseases. It's all part of the same story. So that's my background.
I got a little bit lost, to be very honest with you, in the jargon, but I think that you did a great job at vulgarizing it and making it tangible for people. So what you mentioned is that you outlined in your book the link between sugar and the way that it affects ADMA. Is this
correct?
Yeah.
So ADMA is an acronym for asymmetric dimethylarginine. Now, it sounds like a complicated word, but it really is not. It's very descriptive of a semi-essential amino acid, arginine. So on either side, there's a methyl group. When it's asymmetric, both methyl groups are on the same side. That's all it means. By asymmetric dimethylarginine. But it has a profound effect because it blocks the nitric oxide pathway. But that was not known 15 years ago. And it is known now because the science has confirmed what I said. And it does start the cascade of the change of the nerve from its blood supply primarily to the what we call the autonomic nervous system. So they're very, very thin, in some cases, unmyelinated nerves. I know these terms are very complicated, but they're really very descriptive. So unmyelinated means uninsulated. So let's see, if the nerves came through the dermis into the epidermis, and they're unmyelinated, and you're eating a lot of sugar, and you produce this chemical, ADMA, you're going to get burning, and we call that what? Fibromyalgia. That's what it is. It's due to your diet. Oh no, Dr. Jacoby, you don't understand the disease. Well, yes, I do. Neurologists say, no, that's not true. Well, listen to the term, fibromyalgia. That's not a disease. That's a description of a symptom. Fibro meaning multiple tissues that are inflamed. Myalgia meaning pain of the nerve, or excuse me, the muscle. That's describing. I just described what's causing it. The C fibers going through the dermis into the epidermis by this chemical. It's like your body's on fire. You're not dreaming it. It's true. It's in the diet, and it's worldwide, and it's sugar, and specifically it's high fructose corn syrup. And it causes every disease known to man.
So we're going to go back to corn syrup. It's very interesting because I know a lot of women who suffer with fibromyalgia, And the most debilitating thing is when in front of a doctor, the doctor says, "I don't know how to help you." So it's interesting, and that's an honoring doctor, because most doctors will just try this and that without really knowing how it works. So that just keeps people in pain and extreme anger, because nothing really works, and disempowerment. So it's so interesting what you just mentioned, because then that's the solution, right? So we can go
Right,
back to the discussion around sugar and diet, and how different diseases or dysfunctions in the body can be treated through a proper diet.
right. Well, medical doctors, that's where this term allopathic comes in. That's a type of physician. Early 1900s, there was lots of different philosophies: homeopathic, chiropractic, allopathic, and probably 50 other ones I don't know about. So everybody was trying to understand why people were sick. Big Pharma started in the early 1900s, Rockefeller. He thought there were a lot of snake salesmen out there, and there were lots of different ideas. But he was the ultimate snake salesman. He had a lot of oil that he didn't know what to do with, and he trained people to become doctors, understanding how to employ pharmaceuticals, which has really started with the oil industry. They don't cure anything, nothing. And I emphasize that, nothing. But if you have a headache and you take an aspirin, acetyl salicylic acid, that would mitigate the symptoms of that headache. But the question is, what's causing the headache? Well, lots of things are causing it, not just sugar. But look at the curve over the last 150 years. Every one of these diseases is off the charts. So let's go back 1800s. Well, let's go back to the 1400s. Let's blame. We have to blame it on somebody, right? So let's blame it on Columbus. So Columbus was looking for that perfect spice, basically, and that was sugar. He knew that it was coming into Europe well before he discovered it. Portuguese had been to Puerto Rico 50 years before Columbus. Now, I know I get a lot of hate mail from the Italians, but it's true. He got the maps. He raised the money by going to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel in Spain, and got the money, went to the Americas, the West Indies, and found a wonderful paradise. He was looking for lots of things, including gold, but he brought sugar to the New World, and here we are. In England, 1600s, sugar was worth about $1,000 a pound in our current currency. It was very valuable. So therefore, only the rich could eat it. And who had the diseases? The rich. Who had the doctors? The rich. The poor were actually pretty healthy, except they died from starvation and infectious disease. But the rich had like cocaine parties of sugar. That's what they liked to eat because they could afford it and it tastes great. But they started to get diseases such as, like migraine was a big one, by the way. There's so much sugar. MS started to happen, and let's go to the 1800s. Then you had people like Charcot in France. He described MS. What's the word mean? It's not a disease. This is my understanding. Okay. Now I can pontificate because I've been doing practice a long time. So they can't, well, they try to kill me, but they can't shut me up. The whole model that we're talking about is based on pharmaceuticals. We got an itis, we got a drug. Can't fix it with a drug, we cut it out. It's that simple. That's what we did, and that's what I did. But there's another way to treat these things, another way. First, you have to understand that sugar is the cause. So, what is the biochemistry behind sugar? It's really kind of simple. I'll try to make it simple. It's not simple. It's in chemistry, there are several different processes. So let's talk. So most of your listeners are women. They like to cook. Everybody likes to cook. So this first chemical reaction is the Maillard reaction. Now, I don't pronounce that correctly. It's a French word, but I'm from Philadelphia originally, so we pronounce it Maillard. But it's really Maillard. What is that? Well, that's sugar plus protein. That's how you make the sauces, French sauces, because every time you add a little different spice to that process, you get a different flavor. In chemistry, that's called the Maillard reaction. And that's how you produce advanced AGEs, advanced glycosylated end substances in the body. Number one is pentosodine. Well, what is that? Well, it's what we call an adduct. In other words, when that is mixed together, the collagen, let's take your wrist for carpal tunnel, the covering on the nerve is collagen. Add sugar to it, it makes the shrink wrap on your nerve gets smaller. That's how it works. It's a chemical reaction. Number two, the polyol pathway. Sugar plus a protein, again, inside the nerve breaks down to sorbitol, which is an alcohol sugar. When you have sorbitol inside the nerve, it pulls water into the nerve and causes the nerve to swell. So if that covering is shrinking and a nerve that's swelling, Dr. Dellon taught me, that is nerve compression. It's that simple. But regular doctors, family doctors, neurologists, medical doctors who do not do surgery could not possibly think of this because they can't see it. So let's put Dr. Dellon's lenses on for your audience, okay? Now I have glasses on here. I can't see you. Okay, I put my glasses on, I go, oh my, what a pretty girl in front of me. Because I can see something I didn't see before. I'm in surgery all day long. I can see this. Now, I not only use these, I use 3.5 magnification, and sometimes I use 20 times the magnification. It's a whole different world. I can see the compression of the nerve. And that's what we do in surgery. Find that compression, surgically release that compression so the blood flows into the nerve and the end organ works. It's that simple. But if you're not a surgeon and you haven't been trained by Dr. Dellon and you don't have those lenses to put on, it makes no sense whatsoever. But it's that simple.
I'm wondering if there is any way to have the same process of decompressing once the sugar combined with collagen shrank and then produces the inflammation of the nerve. So there is no other process than going and through surgery, removing and opening the space. But diet would make it that you would never get into that process, or like a low sugar diet or no sugar diet.
Excellent question. So the question I get all the time is, okay, when I see patients in their 60s and 70s and 80s, and they say, Dr. Jacoby, don't give me that lecture on sugar because I've been eating all my life. And it's a process that goes on insidiously that you would not know about. By the time you get to quote unquote pre-diabetes, it's really too late. And that's measurement of the glucose. Now, when you have full-blown diabetes, those adhesions around the nerve are pretty much permanent. So let me break down the questions into something more logical. So the sooner we understand that these symptoms of like headaches or irritable bowel or just achiness or mild arthritis are all the symptoms of the same process, and then you go to your doctor and you say, I need a physical. They check your blood. Of course, they always check your cholesterol. So let's talk about that for the first part. Why do they check the cholesterol? I asked my family doctor friends, we're getting dwindling friends on this one, why do you do that? What are you looking for? Well, we're looking for high cholesterol. I said, cholesterol does not cause heart disease. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You're a podiatrist. I said, I do know what I'm talking about because I'm a podiatrist. You should know, and you're a cardiologist, and you should know. But you're treating these patients with cholesterol, lowering cholesterol. Cholesterol does not cause heart disease. Sugar does. I asked that question to Dr. Cook, who was chief of cardiology at Stanford at the time, head of the metabolic clinic. Dr. Cook run me through this whole process. This is almost 20 years ago. He said, well, it's simple. The lining of the blood vessel, which is called the endothelium, is like Teflon. It's smooth. When you eat sugar, it makes it like Velcro. So cholesterol, being a signaling molecule, goes to the area of inflammation, puts down cholesterol as a good intention to seal the damage that sugar caused. And every time you eat sugar, you get more plaque, more plaque, more plaque. So yes, cholesterol does clog the artery because of sugar. So lowering the cholesterol is insane. Well, I was going to say insanity. No, I just passed $1 trillion. Trillion. That's insanity. That is insanity for the people who are taking the drug for no good reason. Now, I know it sounds like a heretic, but I'm really not a heretic. I'm just telling you what I learned. And it has to do with every nerve in the body, not just the leg. So, but that process is so insidious. Now let's go to that ADMA again, asymmetric dimethylarginine. Well, that's kind of hard to visualize because if you've never had chemistry, or even if you did have chemistry, you can't see it. But you can see the effect of it in a laboratory setting. So when that was first discovered, it used to be called, by the way, the vascular relaxing factor, factor X. They didn't know what it was. And this really simple experiment. So they took aortic rings in a laboratory. I don't know if you see my hand like this. Aortic ring is a piece of aorta with the muscle around the vessel. And the scientists were looking to see when they put a certain substance in this experiment, did it contract or expand? But sometimes it expanded, sometimes it contracted. So the leader of that experiment looked at his assistant and said, let me see you do that. One time he put his fingers inside the vessel. Other times he put it outside. That was the key. That's Nobel Prize in Medicine for nitric oxide. Because the lining of the blood vessel is called the endothelium, and its main function is to produce nitric oxide, which expands and contracts. And that's what ADMA blocks. What blocks ADMA? Our diet. It's that simple. It's sugar. So when I had this discussion with Dr. Dillon and Dr. Cook and Dr. Hamlin from Harvard and Dr. Martin Paul, by the way, also these are top people in their fields. So I couldn't get any of them to see the point of view from any other doctor. They only knew what they knew in their own field. But to connect those dots is very, very difficult. But I did, and now I expanded to every nerve in the body. It's that simple. So really back to the solution, non-surgical solution. I think most people want that non-surgical solution. So if you, don't eat the sugar. Well, yeah, but I love sugar, right? What's your favorite sugar? Come on, be honest.
I eat mostly fruit, but when you ask me that, sugar is in everything. It's 60% of the ketchup, like tomato sauce, is made with sugar. It's in bread. It's in basically anything. Probably it's in the air.
If no one was watching this podcast, what would you reach for?
I'm very open about what I eat. So I can tell you that I had a very sad period where I was drinking Coca-Cola every day. Ooh. And I was feeling extremely guilty because I don't have.
Okay, let's go there. Let's dig into that. Coca-Cola. Where are you from?
I am Romanian. I'm based in Romania now. Yeah.
Ramona. Did they have a lot of Coca-Cola there? in Romania?
It started after 89. So once communism, once the URSS and all the communist bloc fell, then we started having access to all these sugary products. Before it was all mostly created within the country, so we didn't have access to that much sugar.
So let's talk about that experience. So you look too young to have lived under communism, where you couldn't possibly have.
I was 3, basically. In 89, I was 3.
Did you notice the health in your country under communism was better than it is under the Western diet?
Yes.
It really is, but there's a big argument about all this sort of thing, and Cuba being one of them. Michael Moore, you're familiar with him?
Yeah.
So Michael Moore says that U.S. spends more money, or 3 times the amount of money on healthcare than Cuba. And Cuba being a communist country. Of course, Michael Moore is like 300 pounds. So he's not the right person to make the argument. But it's a good argument. He says they spend almost nothing on their healthcare. Well, because they don't have any food to eat. I looked into this very question of what they're eating in Cuba under communism. They eat rats for their celebrations. They have big rats in that country. That's what they eat. They have no protein, no meat, and that's the only thing they can have. So they're very, very healthy because they're eating for the most part, a natural diet, not processed food. There isn't any. But once that gate is opened, like Romania, after the wall came down, our diet, Western diet, flooded into your country. Now, actually, I had that same experience because I was asked by the Surgeon General of Taiwan in 1981 to go there to see why they had diabetes. And I said, the first question I said to him, what's the word for diabetes? And he said, well, we use the word diabetes. I said, that's a Greek word, meaning to siphon out sweet water. So I'm going to ask you that question. In Romania, what is the primary word for diabetes? And don't use the Greek word.
Well, it's pretty much the same. It's just adjusted to the vocabulary.
But I mean, if I asked you, let's say you never heard that word, and I said, do you have people that have high sugar? What would you say?
Yeah, so this is what would be popularly, right? Like high sugar levels in the blood.
Because there really wasn't anybody. Only the rich, probably the communists. They were eating the sugar, right? The peasants didn't get anything.
Back then, we were all communists, so there weren't a lot of layers. But of course, yeah, there was that part of the population that had access to other products. The majority.
Yeah, I say that U.S. can conquer China by sending in just one military person, the colonel. Colonel Sanders could wipe out China. We don't have to bomb them because we can destroy them with the Western diet. Actually, we have. Their diabetes and cancer rates are skyrocketing because they're eating the Western diet. It's worldwide now. It's interesting. The standard American diet, SAD.
It's very interesting. So I live in the Middle East. I live between Romania and Qatar. And it's a similar story. So they had a huge famine several generations ago, like my grandmother's generation. And then there was the boom where now everybody has access to resources and all the products that are coming mostly from the States. And then, of course, everybody's overweight. Most people have I think not only diabetes, but just in general health problems, all sorts of respiratory disease. Yeah.
So what I'm trying to do is make the case that these are not separate and distinct diseases. These are all the same disease. Are you familiar with the word epigenetics?
Yeah.
Okay. I like to say that these are epigenetic diseases because we really never had these diseases, but when you enter into a organism environment that's different than prior, you'll change the gene expression. So in other words, let's take genetics is a very complicated subject, but we're all born with the same gene structure. That's what makes us human. But we also have above, meaning epi above, a bunch of genes that you may have, they call them alleles, groups of genes, sitting on some genetic pattern. You take a bite of an apple, you get an effect. I take a bite of an apple and get another effect. So we each have a different response to the same environment. So in biodiversity, we have to have a different response, because let's take an example. Let's say a nuclear weapon went off tomorrow morning. I guarantee you, some people wake up and say, wow, radiation, love that, because they could survive. Most people would be dead. So that's why we have to have biodiversity. Otherwise, the human experience would be gone in one event. So this new process of high fructose corn syrup, in my opinion, is that new substance that is testing the human genome. And we are having people die massively. That's what viruses, I think, are about, because when you get a virus, what a virus is like, they love sugar. 97% of the COVID people were diabetic. 97% that died in the hospital. Well, why? Because it's sugar. So our medical system jumps on their chest, putting a ventilator on. Of course, that's $39,000 Medicare pays. I'm sure that had nothing to do with it. They didn't need anybody jumping on their chest to help them breathe. They needed oxygen. They couldn't exchange it. Actually, this is very odd, but on page 25 of my book, Sugar Crush, I talked about that, and the book came out in 2015, years before COVID. But if you read that book, you would say, well, all you need to do is lower the ADMA level. Oh, well, there's no papers on that, Dr. Jacoby. Yes, there is. Why did our Surgeon General not know that? By the way, what's his name? No one knows. No one. We have a pandemic. We don't know who the Surgeon General is. I find that interesting. But no, that is known. 97% of people died in the hospitals from COVID, died because they couldn't exchange oxygen. And the ADMA levels were sky high. All you had to do is put them on arginine, basically, take the sugar away, perhaps use stem cells. Oh, wait a minute, my website just went down. See, if I speak like that, they take me down because it's not part of the narrative. And they did take me down. So I couldn't express this. And it'll probably take me down again. So are we going to stop people from eating sugar? I don't think so. But that does help. But the big good news is for your audience and everybody is that stem cells really don't care what you call your itis. And I'll explain that in a second. So I usually say stem cells don't give a rat's ass what you call your itis. I'll explain that. So there's a really interesting paper, or at least interesting to me, because it's a nerve. And they took a rat and they sectioned its sciatic nerve. So they took a piece out, put a neural tube in between, so there's no nerve. They injected the rat's tail with stem cells. In this case, particularly, they were called exosomes. They're very tiny little stem cells. Then they rendered the rats weekly. That's a pretty word to say they killed them. Weekly. And here inside the neural tube, in the rat's sciatic nerve, the axons are growing together. Axons are the very tiniest portion of a nerve. That's my field. That's what I do. That's what I see every day. And I did that at Mayo, by the way, under 20 magnification. Those experiments on rats, so hence the word. Stem cells don't give a rat's ass, which is where the sciatic nerve is, what you call your itis. What I mean is, stem cells will repair any nerve, anywhere. They don't care what you call it, because they don't speak English, by the way, or Romanian, as far as I know. And I've been to Mexico, where the great stem cell clinics are. They don't speak Spanish. And also Panama, great stem cell clinic. They don't speak Spanish there either. They speak their own language of inflammation. Now, I can't get into the weeds on how they work and why they work and everything. It doesn't matter. Don't eat sugar. When you get a really severe inflammatory disease, get the hell out of the U.S. and go there and get stem cells. They work. I've used them. I've used them for 15 years. Why can't you use them here in the United States? Why? Because they work. Not because they don't work. Big Pharma says, oh, wait a minute, this is too dangerous. I have never seen a complication in 15 years. Never. No one's had. But there's not enough research. I agree with that. There is not enough research. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be using it. The question, it is safe, it is effective, we just don't know the exact dosage. And yeah, we need research. But now the government, which is the FDA, by the way, that stands for the Food and Drug Administration. Now, I just talked about the food, poison, right? High fructose corn syrup, under the same agency. They do nothing about that. Now, here we are with the drug. They just classified amniotic tissue, which is the liquid that the baby is growing in, as a drug. What? Oh my God, it's a drug now. So if you believe in anthropology, and Lucy was our first primate 3.2 million years ago, I guess Lucy was a drug dealer. And every pregnant woman since that time is a mule. It's not a drug, but the FDA made it a drug, so you cannot use it in the United States. Does it work? Absolutely works. I've used it for 15 years. Everybody has. Now it's a drug. If you want to use it, you have to go to a research study. It takes about $300 million per itis. And it takes about 10 years. Now you tell me that if that is not the classic slow walking the cure, the only place you can get it is out of the country. Number one. Number two, they also have this little classification they call 361. Very complicated language. But they say you can use umbilical tissue if it's minimally manipulated, which means when you take the umbilical tissue, which is called the Wharton's jelly surrounding the umbilical cord, if you don't disturb it, you can cut it, but you can't add chemicals and things like that to it to alter it. You can use it if, and you'll love this word, it's homologous use. Latin for like for like. Well, most doctors said, what do you mean? Well, there's no umbilical cord in the body. How could you use this? Where would you use it? How would you use it? My solution to that is, and that's my field, the umbilical tissue, the Wharton's jelly, is no different than the supportive tissue to the neurovascular bundle of any neurovascular bundle. So let's take carpal tunnel. You inject that there. Before it really gets horribly compressed, it will dissolve the fibrosis that sugar causes. So this muscle will then work and you'll have that solution. Now, where else would it work? It'll work anywhere, in my opinion, where you have a neurovascular compression. Let's take Robert Kennedy. He's getting a lot of press lately. Have you been following his lectures?
No, not really, but I've seen that he's appearing more and more on podcasts. Also, podcasts in the spiritual world, which I find it really interesting. So his marketing campaign is really working.
Well, he's a connector. I call him a connector. He comes from more liberal than I would be, But his message is very connecting to everybody. He just wants to solve the problem. It doesn't matter where you come from, who you are, or what you are. He wants to solve the problem of disease in the United States and lots of different things. So let's talk about his dystonia. So he has a very difficult time speaking because he got and I don't know exactly what he got, but he does have dystonia, which means that muscle, which is called the larynx, which is a muscle that causes motion to vibrate air, right? That's what called speech. We call that, when it doesn't work, dysphonia. So you have the laryngeal nerve and the muscle, which is the larynx. And if it doesn't modulate the air, you'll have a gravelly type voice, dysphonia. Stem cells would fix that. I have not had a conversation with him, but people that know him want me to. I did present that to him. I think his voice would come back because my theory is simply put, trauma plus sugar equals nerve dysfunction. And it doesn't matter what the trauma is. This phone that we're using, or I'm using right now, when you put it up to your ear, that's electromagnetic field. That is hitting his larynx. That's trauma. Yeah. I started in the beginning, talked about Martin Paul, who helped me with this theory 15 years ago, by the way. His theory is that electromagnetic fields cause a biologic effect on nerves. And when you hold it to your ear, it's really a microwave of it. And this was 15 years ago when it was when 2G. And that time it causes a biologic effect, a thermal effect. It cooks the nerve. So you go back to the chemistry, the cooking expression, Maillard, sugar plus protein, then add microwave. What do you have, class? You got damage.
Yeah.
I know I'd make it too simple. So all my chemical friends, they go nuts when I talk like this. But the PhDs, they're not surgeons. Medical doctors, they're not surgeons. And actually, they hate surgeons. Well, you guys, you don't know your biochemistry. Well, not as well as they do. That's true. That's their life. That's what they do. But if you cannot see what I see, and Dr. Dellon taught me, you'll never get it. And they have never solved it, right? There's not one drug out there that ever solved anything. MS, autism, Alzheimer's, they're looking for a drug. Why? Because that's where the money is. They'll never solve it doing what they're doing. But they'll get a lot of research because that's what funds research. Drug companies. I just solved it for you. That's simple.
I would love to go more into, when you mention sugar, I think that a lot of people are thinking, well, is it sugar in general? Is it including natural occurring sugar, or is it only artificial processed sugar? So this would be the first concern. And then I have another question about the link between Alzheimer's. You mentioned Alzheimer's, and it's one of the, like endometriosis and fibromyalgia.
Well, Alzheimer's is, now remember, Alzheimer's was some guy's name, right?
Yeah.
1900. I think his first name is Alois, something like that. Alois, something like that. Anyway, he looked at these people who were losing their memory. They did autopsies, looked at their brain, and they had their hippocampus shrunken a little bit. He observed symptoms. That's what he called Alzheimer's, his name. What the hell does that mean? I mean, it's insanity to do anything like that, in my opinion. So for 150 years, we use that term. Oh my, what's wrong? We can't figure it out. It's sugar. Which nerve? The olfactory nerve, the one you smell with. They're chemoreceptors. These are mechanical receptors. Your tongue, taste receptors, touch receptors. They're just different receptors. What's the first symptom of Alzheimer's? Loss of smell. Duh. I'll give you a funny story. I was in a laboratory with a neurologist when we shared space for at least 20 years. And they did a lot of testing of drugs. So they were looking at this new drug, Aricept. But at that time it was called like P9748 was code for what they were doing. So I said, did you name the drug yet? He said, no. I said, what do you think you're going to name it? He said, well, we don't know. I said, why don't you name it Duh?
No.
So when you go into the other room and you can't find your keys and say duh, you'll find your medicine. So my point is, they were looking for a drug. They were looking for a drug, and they did find it. It's called Aricept. It didn't cure anything. It made lots and lots of money. I'm not opposed to that, but I kept saying to them, it's a inflammation of the olfactory nerve, because that nerve goes through the nose, through a cribriform plate, a lot of twists and turns, gets the brain and the hippocampus. It's getting compressed. It can't smell. So that organ that records memory, the hippocampus, starts to shrivel up. Sugar. Now, Dr. Perlmutter, who's another excellent neurologist, written a lot of books, has a good talk show, talked about him yesterday, but he's not a surgeon. He recommended my book. He's on the front of my book, Sugar Crush. I guarantee he doesn't know what I was talking about and doesn't agree with it. I guarantee you. And if you run into him, tell him to call me. I'll tell him how to figure it out. And I know what he'll say. Where's your research? Surgeons don't get research, only drug companies. If you don't present that as a drug, you're not getting any research whatsoever. Because they want it. How they're going to monetize, meaning how they're going to pay for $1 billion of research, they want $100 billion back. It's an investment. And they're not cures. Cancer sugar is a cause. In my opinion, stem cells as the solution, if you get it soon enough. Otherwise, you'll have to do the surgery. So it's I make it sound very simple, don't I?
I think it's great because, as again, the public, the audience is not doesn't have a background in anything.
Right. Well, let me even answer that. You asked the question, all sugars. Yes, all sugars have the same effect. So I get the question, how about fruit? Of course. That's what it's fructose. But that's a tough one because people say, well, wait a minute, that's naturally occurring. Okay, let me really dive down deep on what sugar is. So sugar, table sugar, is called sucrose, right?
Yeah.
It's two sugars, fructose plus glucose, joined together. You put it in your mouth, it dissolves into its two component parts, fructose and glucose. Glucose, once it gets past your taste buds, you can eat all you want. But if I gave you glucose, here, I want you to eat this, you would throw up. You can't eat it because it's a poison. It's a poison by itself. Oh, doc, now you're getting crazy, Dr. Jacoby. Well, let's do the experiment on you if you think it's not poison. Anything more than 1 teaspoon at any one time is a poison because you'll spike your insulin. And what's insulin do? It goes out to that glucose and stores it as excess energy and stores it as fat. Every time over 1 teaspoon, which is 4 grams. So why are you eating it? Because they put fructose next to it. Fructose is sweet. When they did the experiments, this is a big trick. So I'm going to be real careful in the words I use here for your audience. So fructose is sweet. When they did the experiments, it did not raise your insulin. Aha, the holy grail. It doesn't raise your insulin levels. But think about it. You have sucrose, table sugar, and you put that in everything. Cook cakes, bread, whatever, right? So you're eating it because you like the sweetness of the fructose, but it comes along with glucose, which does raise your insulin. Oh, but not the fructose. Fructose does something else, which is magical. Fructose goes around through the liver to an enzyme called leptin. Leptin is that little switch that says, I'm full, I'm satisfied, really. But when you eat a lot of fructose, it's turned off. You cannot stop eating. You keep eating and eating and eating. You get fatter and fatter and fatter. You go to the gym more and more often, run marathons. You can run all the marathons you want. You're going to die thin because the internal portion of your body has been burned out like a car and produce carbon-free radicals, etc. So all sugars are poison in that way of thinking. So why is sucrose available? Because it's cane sugar. It's naturally occurring. Why is it there? And this is amazing when you think about it. It's there for a couple weeks of the year. So let's say we're back in Romania and it's 100,000 years ago. I don't know where the famous caves are, but I'm sure there's a Neanderthal in your past. Clients have a cave, got 10 kids in the cave, winter's just over, everybody's starving to death. I got to go find some food. The male goes out. I'm not being sexist here, but you got 10 kids in the cave. I don't think the guy's staying there. Sorry about this. They go out to find some food. What are they going to find? They're going to find some meat, and fatty meat is what they want because that's the fuel that the human body needs. Very little glucose. When you do need glucose, there's a process called gluconeogenesis. You convert protein or fat into fuel when you need it. That's all. When you need it. But you're emaciated. So I'll give the metaphor of a bear. He just crawled out of his cave too. And he used up all his fat stores in hibernation. What's the first thing he does? He goes to find fruit, berries, massive amounts of berries, fruit. To do what? To put fat on. So if you want to be fat, eat massive amounts of sugar. This has fructose in it. And you will get fat. Well, wait a minute. This food pyramid tells us to eat 6 to 11 helpings of carbohydrates and fruits and veggies. And I love it. I hate that word veggies. It sounds so cute, like it's so good. It's nonsense. Nonsense. No one ate vegetables back in your cave in Romania. There weren't any. They might have eaten some tubers, some things that grew under the ground, maybe some carrots. They're disgusting tasting vegetables. Now you're really getting crazy, Dr. Jacoby. No vegetables? I don't think anybody ate vegetables. Now, in a modern society, they do because they're hybridized to put lots of sugar in the carrot. You can eat a carrot, they're great, right? When I grew up as a kid, I couldn't eat a carrot. There was no sugar there. It was all fiber. I fed it to the dog. Thank God I had a dog. Because my father would make me eat that.
And the dog ate it?
Huh?
And the dog ate it?
Oh, he didn't eat anything. But thank God he was there. But my point is, we make up these things that we think are true. It becomes gospel. Government gets involved. Who made up the food pyramid? USDA, United States Department of Agriculture. You think they made it up to make you healthy or sell what they were selling? And they made you fat. Didn't make you fat, thank God.
Not yet.
But they made America fat, and they're killing America. FDA, again. High fructose corn syrup and glucose, they're both poisons. If they're not causing the obesity epidemic, what is? Bring on the FDA director on your show. Ask him. His name is Peter Marks, MD, PhD, very bright guy, and very articulate. And the question you would ask him is, so I might get your picture back there. But the question I would ask him, why is sugar not outlawed? That would be an interesting answer. He won't answer that one. And by the way, Dr. Marks, why don't you allow stem cells to be used? Because this crazy Dr. Jacoby says they fix anything. Well, we need more research. Nonsense. I don't know how much time we have left. I was in Panama several times, Dr. Reardon's clinic. Now, for your women, this is a very sensitive issue. Autism. 25 years ago, when I started thinking about all these things, a autistic kid was 16 births per 10,000 in the United States. 16 per 10,000. You know what it was this year? 1 in 20. 1 in 20. Oh, we don't know what's causing this. Well, let's see. We had pandemic and everybody's locked down because of this pandemic. 1 in 20. Oh, a better diagnosis. That is the biggest nonsense answer to that question ever. It's sugar. Now you're really getting crazy, Dr. Jacoby. I accept the challenge. I'll tell you how it works. It's the hypoglossal nerve. It's the nerve that innervates the tongue. Well, wait a minute. Let's see. Median nerve, muscle, function, hypoglossal nerve, innervating in the tongue. What's its function? Articulate, speech. That's what's lost in newborns. They delayed speech. Here, here, here. What is happening here? Well, there's a lot of controversy on this. And one of vaccines, I won't get into the vaccines, but I do think it's part of it. It's sugar preconception. Most pregnancies, probably in the United States, not going to be a little brash here, happen over a 6-pack of beer and a pizza. What do you think?
I have no
data
for that.
It's not a planned meal. It's random. Now, if you're carrying those genes epigenetically to express, if they come in contact with sugar, and your metabolic rate, I won't go into the chemistry, but if that's high, and the male counterpart is high, and you spin that wheel, you're coming up with 1 in 20 chance of that roulette wheel that's going to give you an autistic kid. Now, they're all different spectrums. Some of these kids are geniuses because they're focused, but most of them are not, and they're institutionalized. That's a national disgrace, in my opinion. Now, let's say I'm wrong. I'm 100% wrong. There's a thing called the null hypothesis. I don't know if you know what that means in science.
No,
Basically means prove me wrong. Give me a grant. Let's test it. Let's test that hypothesis. Prove me wrong. Well, I tried to get it tested. You know who runs all the universities? Big Pharma. Yes, they do. And who else? Who do you think? Major funder of all the universities. Monsanto.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Monsanto. You can look up a particular guy. How many people do you have in your webcast?
So this is recorded.
Huh?
It's live. We're not
No,
live.
I mean, how many would you think you reach?
I think that in total, somewhere around 5,000, something of the sort.
Okay, so and they're young women, childbearing age. Do an essay on your audience and see how many autistic kids they have of that group. I bet it's very high and very sad.
But this would be for these generations, right? Like the generations that are conceiving in these years.
Well, high fructose corn syrup was introduced into the human genome in 1974. So let's say on average, just to make the math easy, age 20, 74, 1994. Take a look at the curve, 16 per 10,000, very rare disease, by the way. And then all of a sudden, about 2000, boom. Mm. Now, that's correlation, not causation. But look at the correlation. I guess you could study meteorites. Maybe that's causing it. I don't know. Maybe it could be exhaust from cars. Could be anything. But why don't you take a simple thing that was added into the human genome, high fructose corn syrup, how it's grown, what chemicals are in it, its genetic makeup, GMOs, and see what you come up with. Mm. Interesting answer. You'll never get it though, because they dominate our universities. That professor is not going to get that grant money because his life depends on it. Mm. But your lives and your listeners' lives do depend on it. And our government is you, me. And you lived in a communist country, and you know what happens when they block free speech. And it's insidious. And everybody gets taken in because they all turn the other way because they don't want to be noticed, they don't want to be harassed, and they certainly don't want to be killed. And that's what's going on. So I think Robert Kennedy hopefully can bring that message to the public. Free speech, open speech, podcasts like yours. Discuss it.
Yeah.
Now, I realize my point of view is extremely different than anybody else's. I doubt that you've ever heard anything like this ever.
It's not really that radical, just because we are functioning in a similar zone of interest, right? Where a lot of the audience and the people that I'm surrounded by understand that there is an agenda, and the agenda is not to have a healthy population that is thriving without any medication and that is self-sufficient and independent. Because you don't want that, right? Like so many.
Well, connecting sugar with all these diseases and how it's connected. And that's what I've done.
Yeah. And what I would love to wrap up with would be suggestions, because we mentioned sugar and we mentioned diet in general. What do you eat, Dr. Jacoby? And what would be, from your point of view, a proper diet?
Well, I think if you really wanted to be that pure person, human being, which is Paleolithic, meaning caveman type, you would be a carnivore. Am I a carnivore? No. Do I strive to be one? Yes. So the first thing I would say to the people who are struggling with weight, it is sugar. They need to get off of sugars two ways. One, cold turkey. In other words, to stop. It's very painful though, because it's an addiction. But it takes about 3 weeks. It's really, and you're going to fall back on it because the sugar is everywhere, like you said, and it is. So most people are probably going to do it slowly, but they're not going to make it either. I did it cold turkey. And the only reason I did, because I thought to myself, well, I'm not addicted to sugar at all. Well, I was. I didn't know it. I went to the gym every day. I kept my weight down. I was in good shape. But as I aged, it was more and more difficult. And then when I gave up the things I liked, bread, number one, oh my God, how do you give up bread? And why would you give up bread? Because Europeans, Romanians don't have that problem. They have that dark bread. What's that? Do you have a lot of pumpernickel, things like that?
No, and unfortunately, we don't even have that anymore. Most bread that everybody consumes is just white sliced bread.
Oh, now, but
yes, now
prior, but then you had to go to the store every day because it would get molded because there was no preservatives.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But see, there has to be a trade-off with with modern society and our ancestors. And that's what I strive to do. Do I do it? No. I mean, it's almost impossible. But my message is, and my new book, by the way, is called Unglued. And it should have been out this month, but I was struggling with the FDA classification of stem cells because it's mainly about stem cells and how to get around this diet thing. But it was actually, I got some intuition onto it. So I was thinking to myself, if there was a process, if you could have your cake and eat it too, kind of concept, still eat sugar, and yet have a process that got rid of the inflammation, that would be the holy grail in life. And that's stem cells. And actually, you can do that. Not advocating that, but I've seen it so many times of people who really never change their diet. Now, they don't get the effect of the stem cells as much as if they didn't, but they have a lot of money, so they get stem cells every month. And they're eating crap diets and they're looking great. But for the average person, change your diet, a little bit of exercise, take some supplements, like things like red light, B vitamins, all those things that you know about. Mitigate the sugar, use stem cells when you can. Life would be wonderful.
Yeah.
And that's the message of my new book.
There will be all the other links to your last book, your first book, Sugar Crush, and then the new book that should be out it was supposed to be
should have been out last month, but that was my fault because I think it's a better book because I think I really have cracked the code on stem cells and how to make it legal by the FDA rules for homologous use using Wharton's jelly. Now, it's a fine use, but that probably can be used for most simple things like arthritis or fractures or carpal tunnel, whatever. But it's systemic things like MS and those kind of things, no, the FDA just frowns upon intravenous or intrathecal, meaning inside the spine, or intranasal. So those things are probably going to have to go out of the country.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately. But there are people who are fighting for other people's rights to get access to something that is actually working. So hopefully there will be a way. We'll see which part is going to win the fight in the long term.
Well, I've been to this clinic many times in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, just outside. They've just built a new hospital for regenerative medicine. It's called the Dream Body Clinic. Excellent clinic, excellent care, and a wonderful country. So that's a great place to go.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being today with us and for being so gracious with your time and with all the information that you shared with us. Thank you everybody for tuning in. And I'm happy to see you next week for another episode.
All right. Thank you.
The best way to support the Healer Hub podcast is to review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and share it with your people. Thank you so much. Deeply grateful for your support.